Okay, good evening on this nippy evening in Jerusalem. Um, so the title tonight is where someone was just commenting on where have all the lions gone, which of course it's sort of like a misquote from a famous folk song from the '60s, "Where Have All the Flowers Gone," which was an anti-war song many years ago, many decades ago. Um, and I have to be honest, giving this class has been on my mind since July. Um, in July, Rivka and I were in America, and We made a couple of beautiful side trips. One to Canada, it was gorgeous, and then we spent almost a week in Boston with my sister. And for the first time since I was a kid, my sister suggested let's go to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And I remember as a kid loving going there with my mother, Aleha Shalom, and my sister. Um, and as a kid, I remember two things more than anything else: the Egyptian mummies and the Monets, the French Impressionists. Even as a kid, I really liked. There was something about the French Impressionists that, even as a teenager and a kid, I really enjoyed them. But this time, like I said, I haven't been there in decades. They opened up a Jewish section. They have a room with Judaica, and there is also some Judaic in some of the other galleries. Apparently, in the last few decades, they've had a tremendous number of Jewish contributors, patrons, donors, and they thought, I think wisely, that there should be a section on Judaica, and highlighted in this section, which had some old things from Europe and from Iran, some Persian things. They had some beautiful items, but in there was a small display in the corner of the room that's for Judaica, was a display about a man I had never heard of, even though I knew his work, named Sam Katz. Now, Sam Katz was I'm reading the blurb from MFA, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Sam Katz, who was born in 1884 and died in 1953, was a prolific woodcarver from Galicia. We would say Agliziana, right? In Yiddish, Agliziana. And he's known to have made at least 24 Torah arcs for synagogues in and around Boston. 5 of them are known to survive today. One I remember growing up as a kid is the Walnut Street Synagogue in Chelsea, which when I was a kid was an Orthodox shul. Today is a conservative temple. And Chestnut Street, another shul that's still Orthodox in in Chelsea. But then one of them is now the Iglesia de Dios Church, the Church of God Church. Okay, and one is the Adam Street Synagogue in Newton. That's still Jewish, but the last one is now Temple Salem Seventh Day Adventists. And the last one, the 5th one, is in the Chabad of the North Shore. What's fascinating about all of the Aron Kodeshes that were made by Mr. Katz, they all feature something that all of us remember, and that is 2 lions holding up the Aseret Dibrot, holding up the 2 tablets of the law. And the reason that I was holding off till now to talk about it is here, especially in Eretz Yisrael, but to a lesser degree in America too, when they make new Aron Kodeshes, they do not put lions. And this year, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, during the 10 days of repentance, I visited my grandson, who is studying in the Beit Midrash program of Yeshivat Beit El in Beit El. And so they have a beautiful Beit Midrash. It's got a whole 700 students. It's massive. It's really, really beautiful, very modern. Okay. But at one point, right after I got there, they made an announcement that Mincha would be held in the old Beit Midrash. So you go outside the new building and you cross this little hallway area, and then you come into the old Beit Midrash, which is tiny. It looks like you couldn't fit more than 50, 60 students in it. It's like a tenth the size of the new one. But lo and behold, in the front of the old Beit Midrash, it was from 1970. It's not like that old. There is an Aron Kodesh with 2 lions on top. The new one, not a lion and not any figures of animals to be seen. My daughter, who lives in Beersheba, they sometimes daven at a shul that's called the Kippah. It's a dome. So they call it the Kippah shul. And a couple of years ago, they redecorated the shul. And when they redecorated it, the Aron Kodesh had the 12 tribes of Israel. And in the 12 tribes, representing Binyamin, they had a wolf. Representing Dan, they had a nachash, they had a serpent. And from a number of the tribes, they had animals. Today, not an animal in sight. All there is vegetation. It seems like when you visit modern Batei Knesset and you look at the parochet and the shulchan, the motif or the item that is most seen, I think today, are rimonim, are pomegranates. And when we grew up, the thing that you saw in shuls was lions. And so the question is, where have all the lions gone? And so that's what I want to talk about with you tonight. In Yerushalayim, there are still a couple of shuls that have lions, but only a couple left. There used to be a large number of them. Tzfat still has 1 or 2, but basically the lions have been eliminated from Batei Knesset in Eretz Yisrael, and to a lesser degree in the United States. What's going on in England and other places, I don't know, but definitely the number of lions as a shul decoration has definitely dissipated. And it's based on what I think is a misinterpretation of part of the second of the 10 commandments. And that's the verse I have at the top of the page. Lo taseh lecha pesel. Don't make for yourselves a sculptured image. This is the Jewish Publication Society translation. If you look at the Rashi right below it, it refers to as a graven image. Okay. V'chol temuna, or any picture. So generally we say a pesel is 3-dimensional and a temuna is 2-dimensional. That's the normative approach, but we're going to talk about it a little bit more as we go along. Asher b'shamayim mimal, of anything that's in the heavens above. V'asher ba'aretz mitachat, and in the land below. V'asher b'mayim mitachat la'aretz, and even in the water that is below the sea. Okay, so Rashi right away explains a graven image. It's so called because it's chiseled. The word pesel, which is the Hebrew word for a statue or an idol, I mean, it could be the same word, is a pesel, and the word means to chisel. Okay, and the Sforno adds that even if you didn't mean for that object to be worshipped, it's still asur. That you might have thought that it was only prohibited if people were worshiping it. Okay, the paragraph after that we're going to skip. We're going to come back to that a little bit later this evening. That's a little bit of a historical overview of of how Jews have viewed art throughout the history. But okay, I want to go to Rabbeinu Bechaye, and he says, after God had warned against believing in any force competing with God, in other words, God gave us one of the very few thought mitzvot. Generally, in Judaism, we don't say it's asur to think something. But the one thought that we do say is prohibited is the thought of, I believe that something other than God is worthy of worship. So that's, I'm the Lord your God, and there shall be no other gods before me. So that is the first of the 10 Commandments. And it's, like I said, one of the very few thought crimes that we have in Judaism. The Torah now adds the prohibition of constructing such a substitute for him. So, in other words, this issue of idolatry has a thought crime connected to it and an active crime of making such an item. A person might have thought, in all innocence, that painting or making three-dimensional replicas of phenomena which God had created would be acceptable to God as a reminder, for instance, of miracles God had performed for his people. Such idolatry would commence with relatively innocent obeisance. So Rabbeinu Bechaye, who lived in Spain, is very concerned that too many of these pictures, you might think that they're innocent, but at someday somebody may start to bow down to it. And in Spain, they saw this kind of behavior where people would see a picture of some Christian thing and they would bow and seem to be worshiping the items in the picture. Such idolatry would commence with relatively innocent obeisance, such as bowing down to the symbol, but ultimately it would result in properly serving such symbols. We're afraid that this is the first step on the rocky road to idolatry. This leads us to the apparent contradiction of the construction of the commandment in Exodus 25. In 2 weeks, we're going to read, hey, you Jews who I just told can't make images, I am ordering you to make images of 2 angels, cheruvim, and put them on top of the holy ark that's going to hold the 10 Commandments in the temple, in the Mishkan. Which sounds as if the same mouth which prohibited making molten images permits them in just a few chapters later, in a different context. God is the only one who knows when to allow or even order the making of symbols. Seeing he allows in one context, he must have his reasons for prohibiting it in other contexts. So Rabbeinu Bechaye, Spanish authority, we're going to talk about this, the sociological phenomenon of the Sephardim versus the Ashkenazim in about 15 minutes. We're going to talk about that. But he seems to be against making almost anything. And by and large, Sephardi shuls did not have lions or these other pictures of animals, which we Ashkenazim in our shuls were very used to, and they're very common in Europe. Okay. Below that is B'mareh HaBazak, which is a beautiful name, in the vision of the lightning, Mareh HaBazak. Now this is Harav Shaul Yisraeli. Rav Shaul Yisraeli was one of the Gedolim that taught at Merkaz Harav in Yerushalayim for many years, and for the Dati Le'umi world, for the religious Zionist world, he was one of the major poskim in the 60s and the 70s and into the 80s. And he wrote this: looking at works, the creation of which is connected to a prohibition of idolatry, even though it is forbidden to create certain forms, the form of a person or the 4 animals on the chariot in sculpture or relief, and for the form of the sun, the moon, and the stars, even when drawn. So, in other words, three-dimensional of many animals we shouldn't do. Two-dimensional, even of sun, moon, stars, you're not supposed to do. That is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. However, and it is likewise forbidden to keep such forms at home. Nevertheless, there is no prohibition to look at such forms if they were not made for the sake of idolatry. Now, someone made a beautiful statue. I don't own it. It's not in my house. I went to a museum to see it. That's perfectly okay unless it was meant to be worshipped by idolaters. Then maybe you shouldn't go visit and appreciate such an item. If they have a statue of Zeus and it really was bowed down to by pagans, that might be problematic visiting such a thing. But if it was not meant for idolatry, it's meant for art, for beauty, and you don't own it in your home, it's perfectly okay. And then he makes a major point. There are those that benitio, that right away, lechatchila, permit the holding of such work in a public space. That is the normative position in the Code of Jewish Law in the Shulchan Aruch. That no, I shouldn't have in my home a statue of a lion. However, in synagogue or in a public place, it's okay, because even though we don't have faith in individuals, we do have a certain amount of faith in the community, that people, if it's public, people aren't going to bow down publicly, and it's safe from people starting to worship such items if they're owned by the community. By the way, I just want to make as a side issue here, the same thing is true of items from the Beit HaMikdash. Now, I'm not supposed to have a 7-branch menorah in my house, but you can really have it in synagogue. I know some synagogues don't want to do that either, because people might think it's like the Beit HaMikdash, but the halacha is that things that were in the Beit HaMikdash should not be in private homes, but they can be in a public format like a Beit Knesset. Okay. After that is Rav Asher Meir. Rav Asher Meir is a very, very nice fellow who used to be in our Beit Midrash from Yeshivat HaMivtah with Rabbi Riskin and Rabbi Bravender, but for the last 20 years has been studying and writing for Yeshivat Har Etzion in Alon Shvut. And he tends to deal with halachic issues that reflect on modern ideas and modern behavior. And he makes a very nice point, I think, at the beginning. The rejection of idolatry is practically the essence of the Jewish religion. Our sages said, anyone who denies pagan worship is called a Jew. Now, it's the initial definition of a Jew isn't someone, who goes to shul or believes in the 10 Commandments or studies Torah. The original definition of a Jew, someone who rejects idolatry, because that's what Avraham did. That's what made him the beginning of our religion, was his rejection of Avodah Zarah. Okay, so that's almost the definition of a Jew. 2 of the 10 commandments are to worship only God and to eschew, nice word, and to forego idols. And many commandments of the Torah are explicitly intended to keep us distant from idolatry. The appurtenances of idol worship are prohibited in the strongest possible terms. Not one trace of the forbidden shall stick to your hand. That's when the Jews were fighting with other people, and we could, afterwards, winning the war, have, booty and plunder from the war, spoils of war, but we couldn't have an idol. Those things had to be destroyed. Breiter limits this considerably. All faces are permissible except the face of man. Notice I can make the face of a cat or a dog or a lion. Tosefta Vodazara. Some early medieval authorities limited this even further, ruling that the prohibition only applies to a statue which represents a complete, proportional human being, including both face and body. The prohibition on modeling the heavenly bodies, the sun, the moon, the stars, is also quite circumscribed. So as we're concerned about making full human images, and we're concerned making images of astronomic phenomena, unless it's done for science. If it's done to understand how they move, because Rabbi Gamliel, in the time at the end of the second Beit HaMikdash, had pictures of the moon on a chart in his apartment, so they could tell what time of the month it was. So that kind of thing, to learn astronomy, is permitted, but to just have it for decoration, we are against that. So there was, I don't know if he's still active, a number of years ago, there was a wonderful Hasidic sculptor in Tzfat, and he used to make wood carvings of Hasidim. His most famous ones were dancing Hasidim, and he never finished the human form. Now, there's the feet were left in the block of wood at the bottom. So he would make a most of a human being, but he would always leave something out to stay away from this prohibition of making full images of humans, and that was permitted. He was a Chabadnik, and he got permission when the Rebbe was still alive to do this. And apparently, he had even given a couple of his sculptures to the Rebbe, and they're in Brooklyn today. But it was fascinating to see him. He had some wonderful pieces of dancing Hasidim, but there would be something missing from every Hasid. Usually the feet were left like in the block of wood at the bottom. So we can do a lot, but not everything. Okay? We have to still get back to lions in a few minutes. If you wouldn't mind, go to the back page. And I want to do the Chatam Sofer. Is the second thing on the back side. The Chatam Sofer, who was writing to someone who was concerned, who was answering a question really, someone who was concerned about shuls having lions. And he wrote the following: God forbid to say that this practice of adorning synagogue arks with decorative lions is included in the injunction, you shall not make a carved image. To suspect, God forbid, that earlier generations, that our Bubbies and Zadis from before us were doing wrong things. The early generations who were likened to angels. Now, the Chassam Sofer wrote this in the beginning of the 1800s. So he was talking about Bubbies and Zadis from the 1700s. And to him, they were like angels. May have transgressed the prohibition against idolatry is to speak malicious falsehoods against the holy ones of our land. So anyone that gets up today and says, oh, we can't have a lion in our shul, is doing a terrible thing according to the Chatam Sofer, because our Bubbies and Zadis had lions in their shuls. You don't want to have a lion because you say, oh, I have another decorative idea. But to prohibit and say it's asur to have lions, that's a problem, because you are defaming our ancestors. This is a beautiful idea that we are supposed to, be continuers of a tradition. And if our Bubbies and Zadis did it, it should be okay for us. That's not good enough for a lot of rabbis today. A lot of rabbis today saying, oh, the Shulchan Aruch says I have to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm not so concerned with what my Bobby and Zadie did. If I could tell you just one quick story before we go on with the sheet. When I was in YU, and this was in the early 70s, I'd been in YU for a couple of years. I went to YU in 68, but there was a family in Muncie, New York, that found they were descendants of the Chafetz Chaim, and they had found the Kiddush cup of the Chafetz Chaim. They were going through some cases of things that had been left, on the side for many years, and they decided to go through them, and they found the Kiddush cup of the Chafetz Chaim. Wow. I think that's terrific. We can use the Kiddush cup of the Chafetz Chaim, but they wouldn't use it because it was too small. It didn't hold enough grape juice or wine, so they wouldn't use. They put it on a shelf. They had it put in a case. It looked very nice, and I actually got to see it one time, and it was small. But I mean, the Chafetz Chaim used it. How can we say we're not going to use? How can we say that the Chafetz Chaim everybody learns Mishnah Berurah. He was the biggest tzaddik one of the biggest tzaddik of the 20th century. I mean, it's amazing. But we're not going to use his Kiddush cup because it's too small. I mean, where did we go wrong? What's the matter with us? The Lubavitcher Rebbe on this topic, the Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote a lot about, was very concerned about animals. He liked animals, but he didn't like non-kosher animals. He said it was okay. He said in this piece here, he said, we see many shoals with images of lions. The intent is that we worship God powerful, Gibor Kari, powerful like a lion. And all the poskim rejected those who prohibited it. Everybody allows it. Everybody says it's fine. And concluded that it's permitted even chatchila. You can make it. You don't have to feel bad. And the Tzitz Eliezer, who was Reb Eliezer Waldman, who passed away around 25, 30 years ago now, and he wrote, in places where they display, where they display lions with the tablets between them, it is according to everyone permitted without any doubt. It is indeed a great kavod for the Torah. So all of these people say that it's perfectly okay. Our ancestors did it. We can do it. Don't worry about it. But slowly the lions are disappearing. As shoals get fixed up, people aren't putting them in. And a slightly earlier, the Chidah, who was in the late 1800s, who is a Sephardi, wrote, the matter is simple. That any place where tefillah or learning is done consistently, that the display of lions is prohibited. And it's my experience that Sephardi shoals, even older ones, don't have lions. Ashkenazi shoals do. And right after this, we're going to talk about why that's true. And then we'll come back to some of these other opinions in a couple of minutes. But generally speaking, Sephardi shoals do not have lions. So anyone who decides differently will be called to judgment for their error. The Rishon LeZion, who was Rishon LeZion in Eretz Yisrael in the 50s, Reb Moshe Suzin, screamed like a crane when he was told that a synagogue in Talpiot, right near where I live, a synagogue in Talpiot, was built with 2 lions on the lintel above the entrance. And in the response called Nahare Afar Simon, it was written that it is not incumbent upon lions to hold the Torah. It is the obligation of the congregants to hold the Torah. Not the lions don't have to hold the Torah, we have to hold the Torah. So these were all Sephardim writing against the practice of having lions in Beit Knesset. Now, why is there this difference? So please do me a favor, go back to the front of the page. This is from a very long article about synagogue decorations. And I just took one paragraph. It was written by a number of people that each contributed. And this is talking about, like I said, synagogue decorations. I don't know who's the author because there are a number of names on the thing. Once the polytheistic religions of the Hellenistic Roman world were in decline. So we're talking about what is that period in like the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Common Era when Rome became Christian. So the Hellenistic, Greek stuff and the Roman paganism was disappearing, okay? And Christianity and Judaism were more likely to pose threats to them than the other way around. The synagogue was able to adopt the iconography of the pagan world and adapt it to serve its own needs. Stripped of their mythological contexts, one could now walk upon the most beautiful mosaic floors in certain synagogues. The most famous of these synagogues, Beit Alpha in a kibbutz up north, and in Chamet Tveria, which is in the southern edge of Tiberias, where there are synagogues with exactly what he's describing here, which were decorated with objects of Jewish origin, as well as motifs taken from the Hellenistic Roman world, such as zodiac signs, with anthropomorphic representations of the seasons, and even the sun god Helios in his chariot. In the floor of the synagogue in Chamet Tveria, they have a massive zodiac, and in the middle of it is this Greek god Helios driving a chariot with 4 white horses. And it's the whole floor of this shul in Chamet Tveria. Anthropomorphic representation, even the god up. It needs to be emphasized that these were the synagogues in which the rabbis who produced the Talmud prayed. This shul in Chamet Tveria is where the rabbis who wrote the Yerushalmi lived and worked and davened. In other words, they had this zodiac sign on the floor of their shul. When I went to YU in 1968, the main building on Amsterdam Avenue was called the main building. Okay, and it was a beautiful building. It was built in the late 20s, and when you came in the floor, and you came in the main entrance, there was a stone floor, and in this stone floor was a brass was a brass representation of the zodiac, of the 12 signs of the zodiac. There wasn't the Greek god Helios in the middle of it, like the one in Chamet Tveria, but there was the signs of the zodiac. And I always thought that was interesting. It was beautiful. It was brass built right into this stone marble floor. And when you came in the main entrance of the main building of YU and of Yeshiva University. And then I came back a few years later, I'm going to say around 1980, to visit, and there was a rug on it. They decided we can't have this zodiac sign here anymore. It doesn't represent the right kind of Torah thinking that we want here at Yeshiva University. But be that as it may. This relative freedom of artistic expression came to an end in the 7th century of the Common Era, because what happened in the 600s of the Common Era? Islam came into Eretz Yisrael, and the Muslims, we know, didn't like any representations of anything. When Islam, with its anti-conic tradition conquered the ancient Orient. A parallel development can be observed in Christian Europe. Oftentimes, the Jewish community interpreted the second commandment in reaction to the iconography of the church, which in Jewish eyes contained more than a trace of idolatry. In other words, some areas we decided what we could do and couldn't do, not based on the second commandment, because we were very lenient on it, but based on what the goyim around us were doing. Avram Yeshua Heschel read the commandment differently. He said, no, he said, it is precisely because God has an image that idols are forbidden. You are the image of God, but the only medium in which you can shape that image is that of your entire life. To take anything less than a full, living, breathing human being and try to create God's image out of it, that diminishes the divine and is considered idolatry. You can't make God's image. You can only be God's image, which is really a beautiful idea, but is not what was done in most places. So the European countries where art became secular during the Renaissance and even a little bit earlier in late medieval, Jews had art in their shuls, but the Sephardim, who were in countries dominated by the Muslims, who were against making any images of basically anything. All of the designs in mosques are very beautiful, but they're all geometric designs. There's no pictures. So the Sephardim developed a tradition without images of either people, animals, or, of course, in our case, lions. And that idea is expressed, like I said, in the Chidah on the backside that we just mentioned. When the Chidah says, the Chidah is Chaim Yehuda David Azilai, and he was, of course, a Sephardi Gadol. He was against doing it. And if you go back, please, to the back side, there's a quote here from Rav Herzog. And Rav Herzog, who was, of course, Rabbi Yitzchak Herzog, Alav Shalom, of blessed memory, was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of the Medina. The first Ashkenazi chief rabbi in the country was Rav Kook, but Rav Herzog was the first one who was during the time of the Medina. And he said, if one would stand on the side of strict law, since the greatest Rishonim, even the Rambam, permitted even the image of lions, later they appeared in the majority of shuls in the diaspora, even in the most Haredi areas in Poland and Lithuania, which I've seen with my own eyes. How could I have the authority to prohibit? Because people wanted Rav Herzog to make it minhag Eretz Yisrael, to not have lions in shuls. And he said, I can't do it, because too many of our Gedolim who preceded us did indeed have lions in shuls, and who am I to go against that? However, Rabbi Yashiv, who just died, was it about a dozen years ago, however, said that although it is improper to put them there, it isn't really considered bowing to it, because the two lions are facing each other holding a crown of the luchot, not facing the people. So he basically said not to do it, l'chatchila, but if it's there, you don't have to do anything about it. Okay. Rabbi Yasher, of course, is an Ashkenazi. His background is Lithuanian, and in Lita, Lithuania, almost every shul had lions, but okay. And the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, who is Ashkenazi, but he went to live in Tveria, which was a very Sephardic town. So he has both traditions, and he wrote, the making of images is prohibited, even if these are meant are not meant to be worshipped. The existence of such images may become the cause of someone somewhere choosing to worship them. The prohibition applies no less when one commissions someone to construct a cast image than when one fashions them with his own hands. So he was against doing them, but apparently only in private hands. He did say that in public places you could indeed use these lions. So I'm starting to miss the lions. I grew up in a shoal with lions, and that shoal sadly doesn't exist anymore. It was ripped down, and the replacement synagogue in Malden, Massachusetts, does not have lions. Sadly, I wish they had saved the lions from the original show and put them someplace, but nobody knows where they are. Apparently, they did get destroyed, and it's just a shame that this is something we grew up with, and I appreciated and I loved, and I loved looking at the examples of Mr. Katz's Aroni Kodesh that were in the museum in Boston. They actually have one whole Aron Kodesh there. It's a small one, but they have one whole one, and then pictures of a bunch of the others. But I'm sort of finishing up with this Rabbi Akiva Malis. Rabbi Akiva Malis was a rabbi recently, not now, but recently in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And he got concerned about this issue of lions and shoal because he saw that people weren't doing it anymore. He was concerned for a lot of the things, missing the lions, but not lionizing them. Very cute, Gail. But he was concerned, well, is it a problem? Because other people today, they're not doing it anymore, and maybe we should get rid of them or whatever. But he remembered the first rabbi of the show was Rabbi Silver, who was a tremendous Torah scholar, and he said it can't be a problem. So he compared it to another issue, and I think what he said was very cute. So he said, he actually got a ladder. He wanted to check and make sure that the lions weren't total lions. So he got a ladder, he climbed up, he felt the back, and the back of the lions was smooth. So they weren't totally three-dimensional. They were sort of, bas relief, not total lions. He said, oh, that may be less stringent. And so he came down from the ladder, and he said, I smiled, and I thought of the incident regarding Rav Moshe and the proper blessing for chocolate. So this is a side issue that I have to bring up very quickly before we finish Rabbi Malis's point. Someone wrote a letter in the 1960s to Rav Moshe Feinstein and said, I say shakol on chocolate bars, but why? Why do I say shakol on a chocolate bar? Chocolate comes from trees. It comes from chocolate, cocoa beans. And they crush them, they make the cocoa. And shouldn't we say at least Brei Pri Adama on it, because the major product comes from the ground? Why do we say shakol on it? And Reb Moshe's answer to him was, your logic is not bad. But our ancestors for centuries now have been saying shakol on chocolate. I'm not going to be the one to say that, my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents were wrong. So we say shakol on it, and we don't change the minhag. Even if the technical halacha may not be exact, it's good enough. And we don't want to disagree with our ancestors. I love that position. We want to see ourselves as a continuation of the previous generations. These modern ideas of we have to throw out everything that our Bubbies and Zadies did, that bothers me. I think that we should want to keep some of the warmth that we had for the religion of our Bubbies and Zadies and say, share coal and chocolate and have shuls with lions. But okay, Rabbi Feinstein had taught his questioner an important lesson about not assuming generations of scholars and pious Jews had erred. Who are we to defame these wonderful people who preceded us and whom we love? My hands-on lessons with the lions reinforce this message for me. Before assuming that observant Jewish communities and their learned leaders have made mistakes, let's do our utmost to try and understand their practices, understand how their practices pose no halachic problems in the first place. I came across several theories as to why the lion became so popular in synagogue art. Okay, number one, the tribe of Judah was traditionally symbolized by a lion, based on the blessings given by Yaakov Avinu. That is, Yehud is called the Gur Aryeh. As the Davidic dynasty stems from Judah, the lion was always associated with Jewish royalty and prestige, a fitting symbol with which to adorn the ark. Two, the lion symbolizes the trait of strength. Gibor Ka'ari, be strong like a lion, a trait essential for living in accordance with the Torah. Number three, Isaiah, Yeshayahu, referred to Yerushalayim, the destination of our prayers, as Ariel, Hebrew for lion. Note that the lion on the flag of the modern-day city of Jerusalem, Ariel, literally means the lion of God. And that's one of the names for the Beit HaMikdash. And because it was a name for the Beit HaMikdash, becomes a name of Yerushalayim in general. And the symbol of Yerushalayim is still the lion. Four, a synagogue ark containing the Torah reminds us of the biblical ark, which contained the tablets of the covenant. Perched upon the biblical ark were two sculpted keruvim, cherubs. Now, we're not sure what cherubs look like. Most people think they look like young children with wings that were angelic, okay? But we're not sure, which Jews were halachically prohibited from replicating elsewhere. As such, mighty lions were seen as worthy substitutes to be perched upon synagogue arks. And therefore, it became the custom in Ashkenaz to indeed have lions on top of the ark or in the shul. Sometimes in on the parochet they'd be stitched in rather than these golden little wooden lions on top, which is what was in my shul. There were lions on top. As a matter of fact, there were 3 synagogues in my town that had lions over the Aron. All 3 of those synagogues have since been destroyed. Maybe there were more, but I remember them in 3 of the synagogues in my town. So there was 2 points that I just want to make. Number one, I think the symbolism of lions is very powerful. Actually, the Shulchan Aruch begins with Kum Ka'ari, you should get up in the morning like a lion. So the lion is something that we're supposed to emulate in our lives. That's point number one, which I think is fascinating and nice and appeals to me. But the other point that I'm sure you heard coming across in my bit of a tirade here is this idea that we are too quick nowadays to find something in the Shulchan Aruch that makes it look like our sainted ancestors weren't doing it right. And I think that whole attitude, I think that entire approach to our religion, I think is missing the point. Because one of the most important ideas that we are supposed to embody, that we're supposed to make perhaps the core of our religion, is to take the Torah and the customs and the lifestyle of our ancestors and hand it forward to our children and grandchildren. And who are we to ever say there was something wrong or missing about the way they did things? It's okay to add, but please don't subtract. Don't take away from the saintliness of the people who we are the products of. Um, Part of me thinks if I don't show proper respect for my Bubby and Zadie and my ancestors, that's what my kids are going to do to me someday. I want my children and grandchildren and Be'ezrat Hashem, my great grandchildren, to look at me as a role model and not look at me as someone to reject and improve upon. And I don't think that we should do that to our ancestors. There's a story that I remember I used to hear in NCSY many decades ago of a family where they were doing the right thing. They brought in an elderly father to live with them, and the elderly father was, as time went on, was getting, clumsy and was dropping plates and dishes and cups. And so they got him a set of wooden dishes, a wooden dish, a wooden cup, a wooden um, glass and cup, and they were for him. And okay, and what happened was eventually the grandfather passed away, and one of the young boys in the family took the wooden utensils and wrapped them and took them, was putting them away somewhere. His father said, what are you doing with those? He said, oh, I'm putting it away, but for when you're old, and I'll use them for you. And it's true. Our kids see our behavior towards our predecessors, and that's what they're going to emulate. And I think we should be showing, if no other reason than for self-preservation, we should be showing a lot of respect to those who preceded us, and not try to find ways in which we can say we're better, because we're not. And that's the most important lesson for us. The other idea about the children, grandchildren, great grandchildren is by the way. I think it's just important to see that we were preceded by giants, and who are we to criticize them? It's our job to emulate them and pass on their wonderful character traits and wonderful customs to the future generations. Okay. Thank you so much for joining this evening. Tonight was an editorial comment on some ideas that are bothering me, but thank you very much for sharing in it.
תודה רבה.
Good
לילה
night,
טוב.
all.